The critique of capitalism is as old as capitalism. Every economic system had the people who loved it and the people who didn't. That's not unique to capitalism, and it should come as a shock to nobody. Slavery had people who thought it was great and hated it. Feudalism had people who thought it was great and hated it. And capitalism, in case you're not familiar, has had people who thought it was great and who hated it all along. If you're not familiar with that, we all know why, or I hope you do. Because you and I, unless some of you are from other countries, but you and I, in most cases, grew up in a society which for the last 50 years has had a virtual taboo on criticisms of capitalism. And you have to be a little not so insular. That's an American problem. The rest of the world, more than we do, knows about those criticisms. And by the way, Americans did too. Coming out of the Great Depression in the 1930s, there was an enormous interest in criticisms of capitalism. No big surprise, because in the 1930s, for those of you who might not remember, capitalism crashed badly. A reminder, 1929, October. That's why October is such a scary month in the stock market. No, it really is. It's part of why we had the volatility a week or two ago. And we will again. Because October is a jinxed month. It hit in 1929. It wasn't over until 1941. 3 years in, 1933, the unemployment rate in the United States, 25%. That's 6 times what it is now. 25% means 1 out of 4 workers were unemployed, which means every American family had somebody who wasn't working. And because there was no unemployment at that time, no unemployment compensation, that person had to either rely on church or family, or neighbors maybe if you were lucky. A cataclysmic collapse. We here don't understand that because most of us weren't alive then. We only have the second worst collapse of capitalism, the one in 2008, but it's taught us a lot. Anyway, out of the 30s came an enormous explosion of criticisms of capitalism. Not so surprising, given what was happening. So we've had that. We've had lots of good criticism of capitalism here in the United States. We had it at the end of the 19th century. We had it again early in the 20th century. We had it again with the crash in 1930. I like to tell my students, I ask them a guess. Where did critics of capitalism, by the way, who called themselves socialists back then, where did they do best? Which state legislature had the most elected socialists of all the 48 states at the time? I won't quiz you. You probably wouldn't guess in a million years. Oklahoma. Socialism in Oklahoma. Lots of it. I bet you there was a lot here in Idaho, too. So criticism of capitalism is not new. There's been criticism, but the criticism died after World War II, or to be more accurate, was murdered. Because at the end of World War II, 1945, when Roosevelt dies, and we can come back to this, it was a very important period in America. Roosevelt dies, the war is over, and the business community is roaring mad. Because in the Great Depression, we had had a movement from below in this country. The CIO, the biggest wave of unionization the country had ever seen, before or since. And a big socialist party, 2 of them, and a big communist party, and they all worked together. And they put the squeeze on Mr. Roosevelt in Washington. And he had to do things for the mass of people. I can see from your faces that this history is maybe a little rusty. So let's do just 2-3 minutes. In the depths of the Depression, they went, the communists, the socialists, and the unions, because they represented millions of workers then. They went to the president and said, we want a meeting. The president, smart politician, didn't say no. You couldn't say no. It's not America today. It's America then. And they got together and they met. And the unions and the socialists and the communists said to the president, you've got to do something to help the American people through this horrible depression that we're suffering. And the subtext, which nobody needed to spell out, was simple. If you don't, Mr. Roosevelt, you won't be president much longer. Not only will we not vote for you, but these nasty socialists and communists over here are talking about making a revolution. Roosevelt thanked everybody for their opinions and immediately called a meeting with the business community. And, you know, he came from that kind of family anyway. He know these people. And he told them what had just happened with the unions and the communists and the socialists. And then he surprised them. He said, I advise you to let me do what they want me to do, to help the mass of the American people. But not only do I want you to let me do it, you got to give me the money to do it. Because this is the United States government and the depths of depression with millions of people out of work. There are no taxes coming in. We can't do it. The government can't do what has to be done for those people. But I advise you, rich American businessmen, notice I didn't say businesswomen. We hadn't come that far yet in America. They were all men. I advise you to give me the money. And here's why I advise it to you. Because if you don't give me the money to do this for the American people, my guess is you won't have any money at all anyway. So give me a bunch so you can keep the rest. Kind of a blunt conversation, don't you think? He split the business community. Half of them hate him. Their descendants are called the Koch brothers. And the other half went along, which is all he needed. He went back to the unions and the communists and he said, I'll make a deal with you. I'm going to take care of the American people like you asked, better than you asked. But that talk about a revolution, that's got to stop. And they said, okay. The unions, the communists, and not all of them, they were dissenters, but they basically said, okay. Good, said Roosevelt, now I'll do it. I can see again from your faces, quickly. Gets on the radio, no TV then, right? Gets on the radio and establishes, in the midst of a depression when there's no money, the Social Security system. We've never had that in America before. He announces, when the government has no money, that I'm going to give a check to everybody who's 65 years of age for the rest of their life. I'm going to do that because it's going to help millions of Americans. And not just the older ones who are 65, but all of the children who would have had to help their parents without a government check. So it's really good for everybody. Wow. Second thing he did, he established unemployment compensation. We never had that before either in America. In the midst of a depression, he announced, I'm going to give every unemployed worker, and there were millions of them then, a check every week for a year or so. Wow. Then he passed the first minimum wage. We never had that before in America. And I left the big one to the last, because your faces are giving you away. He created a federal employment program. Between 1934 and 41, the federal government hired 15 million American unemployed people. He put them to work, gave them a check every week, paid them a salary, which meant they didn't lose their homes because they could make their mortgage payments. And you know what those people did, those unemployed people? They built many of the national parks that you all visit and enjoy. They did the first conservation work in this country, the Civilian Conservation Corps. The WPA said to all unemployed artists, come, we'll hire you. Can you paint? Can you sing? Are you theatrical? Do you know how to sculpt? Can you, whatever, come. We'll make troops and we'll send them all over America to bring culture to the rural and small towns. I've never seen such a thing before. It was the greatest explosion of shared culture in American history. We've never had anything like it before, and we've never had anything like it since. Wow. And guess what? To give every old person a check every month, to give every unemployed person a check every week, and to hire and pay the salaries for 15 million people, where did Roosevelt get the money? Here comes the best part. Ready? He taxed corporations and the rich. I gotta say that again. You know why? Because so many of you imagine that that's not possible, that somehow that's not in the works, that's pie in the sky, a vague utopia, a distant future. No, it isn't. It's your history. He went and taxed them, big time. Hey, let's go do it now. He took money from corporations and the rich to do wonderful things for the average American citizen. Well, to be honest, the average white American citizen. Blacks, true to our nature as a country, were left out. Do you understand? He took from the rich and gave to the poor. Robin Hood. Now, what happened to the president who dared take from the rich to take care of the American mass of people? He was elected and re-elected 3 times. He was the most popular president in the history of this country. Nobody ever came close. So it turns out it's not bad politics either. You just have to have the situation. Or to be more accurate, you have to have a movement from below that makes it happen. And that's not a pie-in-the-sky dream of the left. That's your history, from which you can draw the conclusion, if it was done before, it can be done again.